And that's why I think of the market as less of local and more regional. I think a few hundred miles is a region. It's kind of by watershed is really how I think of the food system. And a lot of that infrastructure was regionalized 80, 100 years ago through co-ops that shared services among farmers. That was all kind of consolidated away in the massive kind of expansion of American agriculture. But it's how it was done. And not every farmer had to do their own thing on their own, and they could share resources. So we're seeing a return to a lot of that kind of aggregation of shared infrastructure, co-branding among networks of farms, sharing some resources, because if you're gonna really try to compete, you have to bring your resources together. And if you can do it in a farmer-friendly way, cooperative way, it's very powerful.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey everybody, welcome back to another show of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Neil Collins, and it is a pleasure and an honor to have Dan Miller tuning in today for a conversation, who is the founder of Steward, which is an amazing platform that I actually just recently invested some funds in, and it's really tackling the world of regenerative agriculture and the financing and funding around it. So Dan, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Dan, before we really get into Steward's story, I'm just super curious about yours, because it looks like you've got a long history of real estate involvement, agriculture as well. I know that your family has been involved in that. But I'm just generally curious of like the stories and the moments that led up to you getting involved in the real estate and the financing industry, and like let's start off with where you're from and what your background is.
Sure, it all connects together, and began in real estate, has moved now regenerative agriculture, and then the integration of the two. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father's family was in real estate development. He did a lot of commercial real estate development in the city and elsewhere. So I kind of always learned and was around that. And then my mother's family has been farming since the late 1800s in the eastern shore of Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay, which was one of the key watersheds of the country, but has been depleted in a generation. So you would always learn about that as the watershed, the importance of protecting it. But I grew up in Washington, D.C. I maintained ties to it, but was trying to figure out how to reconcile both of those. After school, I founded a company called Fundrise, which was the first real estate crowdfunding platform that was actually built off of real estate developments my brother and I were doing in Washington, D.C. that were non-traditional. So they were, historic restorations with non-credit tenants, design focus, that, the products that people want, but that finance traditionally doesn't understand or isn't interested in funding. So we had kind of frustrations with traditional private equity and just IRR driven investors, and felt, let's build a platform that lets individuals use their capital to finance and invest in projects that are aligned with what they would like to see, actually giving them a stake in what's built in their neighborhood. Seems like a fundamental concept, an enormous amount of red tape to make that possible, but we were the first platform to do a direct offering through Fundrise for originally our buildings, and then broadened it to now raising capital for all types of real estate projects. So, through that, I learned how to raise funding online, the regulations to follow, the kind of alignment and interest people have in putting their money into alternatives that have some texture, that are, beyond just return-driven investments. And then I read The Unsettling of America in 2015,
Is
and
that
that
Wendell
is
Berry?
kind of Wendell Berry, The Unsettling of America, which everyone should read as just the kind of foundational text, not even necessarily for regenerative agriculture, but as on American agriculture and the kind of industrial system that's been built, and the history around that and the cultural impacts it had. So all the time then growing up and spending time in Chesapeake Bay and seeing monocultures of corn and soy and broiler chickens, and feeling like, well, if all the fields are planted but yet it's a depressed region that has no fresh food and the watershed's being destroyed, something's wrong. It looks like it should be successful, but it isn't. And Unsettling of America kind of anchors around the political and economic decisions over the past century that led to what is an incredibly subsidized, distorted agricultural market, really built for commodity export, really just built to grow huge volumes of commodities to send and put into relatively unhealthy products or supply chains or feed cattle. And so you have a system that was destroying itself, and what was the alternative? And I think through The Unsettling of America, you realize there is a strong cultural movement of growers and farmers who are taking care of the land and who see that as their duty and who grow amazing products. I had been connected to that through chefs that were sourcing directly, and saw it through the kind of purchasing side. But as I began through some of the chefs and through other introductions to meet farmers, I realized that the real holdup was funding. They have tons of demand. People love the story. People want to support these types of farms, but if they don't have financing to buy land, equipment, operational capital, the rest doesn't really matter. They can't serve demand. They can't get to a viable scale that makes sense for them. So I had been doing Fundrise and felt, well, let's take a similar concept. Let's allow individuals to provide their capital to regenerative farmers that they're supporting through CSAs that they want to see successful, but who right now don't have financing options. Almost all funding in agriculture is driven by the USDA and government policy. So you have incredibly low subsidized capital if you're doing grain and huge monoculture. But if you're doing anything alternative, 50 acres of diversified vegetable sold at a farmer's market, you're cut out. You're just not, you don't fit that system. So the goal with Steward is, how do you bring alternative capital to what is an alternative market of really passionate, really amazing growers, but people who haven't had the resources they need to thrive, and allow the people that want to see those farms succeed to go beyond just purchasing and actually put their capital to work. So to support these farms, at the end of the day, it's commercial real estate just used for agricultural purposes. So a lot of the understanding I had around real estate finance and development finance and bringing that to agriculture has been very helpful to think in creative ways how to make these projects work. But ultimately, we're just seeing there's so much demand. There's so many people that want to put their money into more values aligned places, and there aren't great options. And our goal with Stewards to be the option for regenerative agriculture through a variety of products, but all very transparent, all telling a clear narrative, and us doing a lot of the work around diligent servicing oversight that is hard for people to do on their own, but that's needed to make sure there's viability.
And what a beautiful story of following your passion and interest. I'm curious about Fundrise, because that was obviously a name that we heard a lot whenever crowdfunding was just coming on to like the mainstream consciousness. And I like it's fascinating to see that you had experience there and then was able to translate that into regenerative agriculture finance. But what do you find that it has a crossover of the same type of mentality for the people that are putting in and contributing funds? Like, is there that same, like, oh, I understand this is commercial real estate, but to kind of the average person that is putting in funds into Steward, do you find it's the same kind of mentality as they would if they were to put in funds into Fundrise?
So I had, they appear similar, right? You would think they're just parallel, but the reality is they're very different markets. Almost nobody has money in farmland other than people with, an astronomical wealth or huge pension funds, but the kind of average individual has zero money in a farm. Maybe a kind of random person will have lent some money to a cousin who's a farmer or a random link, but in terms of a kind of a market for capital. Whereas in commercial real estate, there's a million different options of funding. There's there's now more access, and that's what Fundrise helped do, broaden access, but there was already a capital market. There's already money flowing into it. So for Steward, we're really having to create a capital market from scratch, a capital market around regenerative agriculture that did not exist. The commodity ag market is enormous, but the regenerative ag financing market, didn't exist. You just have farmers who are on, credit cards and savings and maybe some random money that can get some friends and family. So we're having to educate people around regenerative agriculture, explain how we vet deals. It took me a few years. In the first 3 years of deals, I funded personally, me and my family, to help build the portfolio to really understand the customer. What rates can they afford? What deal structure makes sense? What do they need as a business to thrive? Other than just financing. Financing opens up options for growth, but then there's operations that have to be part of it, decision making. So I found a much, the actual product basically on both sides of the market, the farmer and the funder, was nascent, was non-existent. And so you're having to develop the software and technology and regulatory system to enable the market, and then you're having to develop the actual market. But the thing I did find that was similar, at least to the real estate projects that I was passionate about, were very passionate entrepreneurial sponsors and founders and farmers who are obsessed with the quality of their product, obsessed and uncompromising about how they do things. And the net result is an amazing product that people celebrate and people love to eat and support. And so that kind of like entrepreneurial streak that I view as critical to the success of a lot of these regenerative farmers, because you're really in a totally open market. You have so many avenues you could sell through and products you could grow, and it's a really dynamic market. That's the same. But in terms of the customer and the funders are generally not familiar with the asset class. And then we've had to just build a lot of capacity to help enable these farms to be successful beyond just funding. But I will say now the momentum is enormous. The kind of like the desire to put money into regenerative agriculture is immense. So there's still a gap between kind of the talk and interest and the reality of the dollars in the market, but it's moved tremendously. So I think, 2016, when I began working on this, I don't even think you would have used the term regenerative agriculture, and almost no one would have been familiar with it. Now it's been front page news with COVID and kind of climate challenges. The sense that there's an alternative way to do agriculture that's more positively impactful in a multitude of ways is now clear. How do you do that? That's the unknown, because it's basically hasn't been done for 100 years, other than some scrappy, farmers that never gave up.
I'm curious, if you started in 2016 on this project, what was really the reaction and reception amongst your peers and colleagues after creating an organization that became quite known mainstream with Fundrise? Was it well received, or was there a lot of skepticism around going into regenerative agriculture?
Skepticism, but more like humor of like, what even is it? I think it was complete unknown. For me, I saw the vibrancy in it through, the chefs I knew who were sourcing direct from farmers, and the kind of broader movement and demand around people's desire for these types of products, and then tracing that to these farmers and like who even is a regenerative farmer. Just took me time to meet and understand, these types of farmers. And so I felt there was such viability in the market, but it's a kind of an unknown, non-existent market. But in reality, agriculture is one of the biggest asset classes on the planet. This is the fastest growing sector of it, and it has to happen. There has to be an ecological transition in our agriculture. Is really not an alternative. How quickly is the question, but it has to happen at some point. So now I think the market has moved, and it was a bit like that with Fundrise, that it's not well understood, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, of course that needed to happen. And I think it's a bit of the same with the culture. The culture shifted very quickly around what people are interested in or comfortable with. With Fundrise, it was more of investing online, that people weren't investing in private online businesses. That wasn't really happening. We helped to build that. Now I think it's capital that wants ethical return, true ethical return, not like an ESG fund that's invested in like Amex and all types of random companies that somehow meet some ESG list. It's like, no, this is a urban farm in Detroit that's restored vacant land and is growing food for their community and is earning revenue and is a viable business, but the impact of what they're doing is felt. So I just always follow my instinct on what motivates me. And often that's or very early in a market of just something I've seen or am interested in. But the reality is that there's just a really passionate group of people that care about this type of work. And so I find like among the farmers, among the funders, among our staff, there's like a commitment and interest in it that goes far beyond the real estate industry normally, which generally is a profit focused market. Regenerative agriculture is not a profit focused market in terms of you would not do that expediently to make money. It's not the option you pick. Long term, you can have a viable enterprise, but it's not something that people go into with any other interest other than the passion for actually doing that work.
So many thoughts around that. I had the pleasure of doing some homework for this conversation, and you were talking on another podcast about how so few people actually invest in their local food supply chain. And I just thought that was so extraordinary that you're right. I mean, most of the people are not invested in it. They're participating through kind of the mainstream agriculture, and you see so much passion around this, around local food and slow food, and just to see the organic and the sustainable and the regenerative movement starting to pick up. I'm curious, coming from the disciplines of like capital needing a return. You've got regenerative farmers like Gabe Brown that's saying, I switched over to regenerative agriculture because I got tired of signing the back of the checks and not the front of the checks, or no, the front of the checks and not the back of the check, excuse me. So I'm curious, is this like, do you think that people are becoming more interested in it because they see this is an area for higher yields, or are they coming at it from more of like a this is we need to go local, we need to encourage this kind of healthy soils, healthy lives approach?
So I think it goes on both sides of the market. I think on the funding side and on the kind of interest from the consumer side, it begins generally with health and with climate. It begins around the social purpose, and then the thought is, how can I put money towards that and earn a reasonable return? But we have a true market. I mean, our interest rates are 5 to 10% on deals, depending on kind of collateral security. We don't take any spread that goes right to the funders. Our view is like, you have to have a viable return, not a double-digit crazy return, but people have to earn a reasonable return to be able to put it to work in the sector and recycle it back. So we want to prove that there are viable returns in regenerative agriculture. I think it has to be to be viable. If it's just 1% returns or you're losing money, then you're only talking about wealthy families or people that can just lose money who can do it. If you really need the scale, we're talking about millions of farmers, like immense change in agriculture. You have to have a real market that supports it. But on the farmer side, there really is viability. Like regenerative agriculture is the better, more viable option, because you're recycling nutrients. You're not buying expensive inputs. The kind of chemical and fertilizer inputs on normal conventional farms are extremely expensive and have a less and less marginal improvement every year that they're used. And then these farms are using land very efficiently, relatively low capital in terms of infrastructure, so they don't have these huge kind of pieces of equipment that they have to be financing. And then they're selling direct, or as direct as possible with a high margin. They're not selling through 5 intermediaries. They're selling direct or to a chef who's buying a good price at a good volume. So ultimately, it's a better business model. And then once they realize that if they can have that business model, kind of low expenses, low overhead, high margin direct sales, if they can get a boost of funding, they can thrive. They have demand for their tomato sauce. If they had a piece of equipment that cost $10,000, they could make 10 times as much of it, because right now they're doing it by hand, which is crazy, but that's just what they do. They don't have the equipment. And so the consumer demand on the market side is so immense for truly regenerative, actually traceable agricultural products, that if they can get their production up, they can sell it, and then they have more cash flow to grow. So there's absolutely viability in the enterprises themselves and the ability to finance them at reasonable rates. But that was a learning for me. When I first began this, I wasn't sure, does it have to be more of the kind of like impact, not high return? And I just felt like it has to be reasonable. It has to be reasonable rates that they can both thrive on. And then other things we do to help manage the kind of cost and capital, we do grant writing for a lot of farmers. There are a lot of grants out there to help regenerative farmers with irrigation or fencing or value-added products. So there are monies of people who foundations or the USDA who is also giving money as a grant form. It's very bureaucratic and complicated to get them, so it's easier for us to do it on behalf of the farmer. So our general view is let's just bring whatever resources we can to these farmers for them to be successful. Ultimately, if the whole market, if all the subsidies were taken out of the agricultural market, it would be the regenerative farmers who would thrive, and the conventional farmers built on these big supply chains and like really subsidized systems would collapse. So if you're talking about really actually just everything's cleared out, what is the more competitive farm? It's no question the regenerative model, but you're dealing with a legacy system of enormous distortion and enormous political and corporate power that tries to just hold on to the market and keep it alive, but it's not going well for the conventional farmers. It's a tough business.
It's so interesting that you're really talking about a shift of commodification, food as a commodity to direct to consumer. And so just interesting that transformation that comes whenever they do get some capital. What is the sample projects, or what are some of the more memorable projects that stick out in your mind? You said you self-funded a couple to get it going, but like what's been some of the passion projects that you've really proud to be a part of?
We have a lot of great stories. One that I particularly love is an Amish farmer in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania that we funded. This was through a chef who first connected me with farmers, Spike Jurdy from Woodbury Kitchen, who's kind of a farm to table hero in the Chesapeake watershed, and now is actually working with Steward, which makes it come full circle. He connected us with this farmer he's been growing for a long time. He's a dairy farmer in Pennsylvania. Dairy as a general sector has been under pressure. They were selling through a local co-op. The co-op went out of business. Now him and the local Amish farmers don't have a place to sell their milk. And so we came in and financed equipment that would enable him to do value-added processing so he could have fluid milk, cheese, butter, and sell that direct to the chef, but also to other people in the market. So we financed the equipment for him to install it. We helped him get an inspection done to get grade A milk license to sell across state. We applied for a value-added producer grant on his behalf that he actually got earlier this week to help cover some of the operating and marketing costs for launching it. And we've now secured over 50% of the sales he needs through the local market in terms of coffee shops. So it kind of shows it's just a farmer who has amazing product, but is just outside the system, and the market is changing so fast, and helping them go down the value chain, kind of take control of their product, not rely on these kind of distributors and co-ops and intermediaries, and now have a direct channel to market and sell product. And like that's the playbook that we do a lot of. How do we expand the direct sales, but also how do we develop value-added products that are higher margin, that are going to support the business more? That often requires equipment, operating capital that they don't have. But if they can have that, they can launch a viable business. Another one I love is Fisheye Farms in Detroit. That was one of the first farms we funded in 2017. It was a growing on the 16th of an acre in a side lot in Detroit. It was actually the farmer's uncle owned a dry cleaner, and he started farming next door. So, truly grassroots agriculture. And the Detroit Land Bank was interested in potentially selling them some land. It took them years to get access to it, but they needed financing to buy it. And so we stepped in, helped them buy over an acre of land. They went from 10,000 of revenue to 120,000 in 3 years, by just putting up and having the right infrastructure they need: high tunnels, drip irrigation, fencing, wash and pack, farm stand. So, it shows the viability of these enterprises to drive a lot of cash flow, but also restoring vacant land, in a food desert, and having an option for direct sales that during COVID really became a community anchor of, the only access of fresh food. So I think the stories that I love are seeing a transformation in the enterprise, seeing the kind of opportunity these farmers have and helping them navigate that transition. And that's where our business is going, of beyond just financing, providing those support business services like helping through inspections or helping with grant writing or helping them do the branding and packaging for product. Because if they do want to compete in a regionalized market, they need to get their systems in place. And that's why I think of the market as less of local and more regional. I think a few hundred miles is a region. It's kind of by watershed is really how I think of the food system. And a lot of that infrastructure was regionalized 80 to 100 years ago through co-ops that shared services among farmers. That was all kind of consolidated away in the massive kind of expansion of American agriculture. But it's how it was done, and not every farmer had to do their own thing on their own, and they could share resources. So we're seeing a return to a lot of that kind of aggregation of shared infrastructure, co-branding among networks of farms, sharing some resources, because if you're gonna really try to compete, you have to bring your resources together. And if you can do it in a farmer-friendly way, cooperative way, it's very powerful.
Hey everybody, this is Neil. We are going to get back to this great conversation in just 1 second. But I think it's fair to say that right now we are facing some pretty unprecedented challenges in the 21st century. I mean, you name it, environmentally, socially, economically, we've got some big problems that we need to overcome. And that's why, for me personally, and the people that work with us at Latitude, we want to dedicate our time and our energy so that we are not only working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but also make the world a better place. And so if you are at all interested in combining your sustainability values with a very powerful financial model of real estate, then I highly encourage you to check out what we are doing at Latitude. We are creating something truly special with a tribe of change agents that for now is working across North America. And hopefully one day in the future, with you coming on board, we can be working across the globe. So please check us out. You can go to www.chooselatitude.com, or you can find us on social media at latitude.realty on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Okay, let's get back into it. Yeah, that seems to be like the most stickiness and biggest upside. Truly, that's a differentiator of if you can share those resources and share a lot of the kind of the intellectual property of how to brand and how to stand out in the marketplace. Because you see a lot of just amazing producers that they're doing everything from sun up to sundown, and can become quite overwhelmed. And that even if you're given capital, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're setting themselves up for success.
Yeah,
so
and we see that all the time, and that's where I think urban professionals are like, well, what can I do to help the move? And the first thing they can do is put their money to work actually funding these farms, and the earnings that they've had in being in a city generally are more than their rural counterparts. But then the second is actually, as opposed to them becoming a farmer, which yes, is a potentially nice option, but in reality is a limited amount of people that's actually going to happen for, use their professional skills to assist these farmers. If they're a lawyer, there's enormous amount of legal needs for these types of farmers. If they're an accountant, same for bookkeeping and tax filings. And for marketers too. I mean, you're in Portland. Portland has immense brand marketing prowess. I mean, just incredible local brands that have been developed. If that kind of same look, feel, and style could be integrated among actual local farm products, I mean, you're talking about really marketable things that people would buy and that would stand out, not just in quality, but also in look and feel, which does matter to consumers. So that's kind of the kind of network that we're developing of how do you take people with those skills that are kind of general business, but then apply them in regenerative agriculture, because a farm is really just a small business that produces an agricultural product. Most farmers are focused on the production, and so they're not really spending as much time as they should on those other things, but those other things can be done by other people, if you can integrate and connect them. So we're seeing a lot of opportunity in putting those networks together, and they love to support each other. That kind of urban professional dreams of a meaningful project. And these farmers just don't have the wherewithal to manage some of these more sophisticated business issues.
Yeah, and that's the link that I think is so incredible of bringing the urban and the rural together, like to showcase that they really need each other. They are intricately linked, and there's value that flows both ways to create more of a regionalized system. I'm curious, Dan, on the lending side, who are you attracting? What is it? People that are coming in with small amounts of money, large amounts of money, or institutions starting to take notice of this? What do you see of that field?
So yeah, on the capital side, I mean, that was the new market we're developing. On the farmer side, there are regenerative farmers out there, and there have been, and we're getting into those networks and building them. But on the funding side, it was, what does the product need to look like and how should it be structured? So our focus is on credit. We're providing loans to farms. We have two main products that people can fund: either participated loans, where they're buying a slice of a loan to an individual farm. That's term financing, a 5-year loan for purchase of real estate that will help them build out the land, and in that period they'll cover interest payments and then refinance or pay off the loan. Or they can invest in Steward Regenerative Capital, which is basically a short-term loan fund where we can make bridge loans to farms and people lend us money short-term. I don't know if people would be familiar with the commercial paper market, but it's almost a replication of that, of how do these regenerative farms get access to quick short-term money that they need for business opportunity, seasonal cash flow, quick real estate purchases, and then they can also use our platform to refinance with term funding. People that are participating in these loans, I mean, you have individuals who have connections to the farm and are connected through that way. You have people that have just come to our platform and are just very passionate about regenerative agriculture and not even location specific, just really buy into the stories. People putting a few $100s into loans, people putting hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's very anti-institutional, and it's people with their own capital, moved to action by the story of the farmer or the desire to put money into the sector. And so they're very motivated, they're very aligned. Most of the time they're thanking us for the chance to do it, because otherwise, how are they able to directly get money into the sector and see it? So I think it's going to be, individuals, it's going to be high net worth funders, it's going to be family offices, but it's a certain connection where it's values focused capital. But we are now seeing investment advisors come our way who have clients and they're trying to put their clients' money into more, ESG products. So I think over time it will become, there will be larger operators, but I think it's more about personal, people and that connection than it ever will be around like private equity funds and those types of groups. I'm not particularly interested in having those types of groups on the platform. I think the idea of kind of direct sale on the farmer is also a bit of direct financing of like, let's directly make the connection among the people whose capital it is and the farmers. And there's a lot of intermediaries in the capital side too. So really we're just trying to cut out most of the intermediaries on both sides of the market. That leaves better economics and return, but there's also a connection that's built among, people funding these specific farms. They are more likely to buy from those farms. They often want to do site visits and stop by. They just like word of mouth are excited about it. And so there's certainly a network effect that builds among projects that, one project brings more people, who then means there's more capital for the next deal, which then means there's more demand from other farmers. And you're starting to see the symbiotic nature that each new transaction, new set of customers strengthens the actual network, which means the next people that use it, it will have a quicker time, or there's more capital on it, or it's better able to serve farmers.
How did the bridge funding come about? I'm curious about the genesis of that, because I was looking on your site for projects to plug into to fund, but there was nothing available at the time. And I was talking with your VP of marketing, who's local in Portland. He was just saying, they're hot, they fill up really fast. And that's why I think it's so interesting that you've got this like bridge mezzanine fund that people can contribute to. I believe it was a 5% return, which seems like just a no-brainer, at least on our part, to be like, yeah, this sounds great. Like let's plug some money in here, and 9 months later we have access to it. But in the meantime, they can put it to good work.
It's a very competitive product, and it really could have been developed with our market knowledge of just real understanding of what these farmers need. So on the funding side, people are making 9 months loans to Steward Credit, which we formed. They can withdraw their funds at 30 days notice, 3 months notice at any time. They make a 5% return, a 5% interest rate, basically, that's paid monthly. They can, after 9 months, renew and keep their money in, withdraw it, but it's meant to be, relatively liquid for people to get short-term high yield. I mean, 5 is very high for a short-term high yield. What we then do is we take that capital and make short-term bridge loans to farms. Most of those loans are backed by real estate. What really, how the market really developed was kind of three requests we kept getting over and over, and then we figured out how to serve them. One was quick money to close on real estate deals. All the time, a farmer will have, wanted to buy an adjacent piece of land for 5 or 10 years. All of a sudden, then the neighbor, they always know the neighbor, they're always talking. The neighbor's like, all right, I'm ready to sell it. If you can buy it quickly, I'll let you buy it. Otherwise, I'm going to go out to market. And these types of regenerative farmers, they don't have access to Swift. They don't have their own capital that can do it, but they don't have Swift money that can close quickly on deals. And they need to be able to close quickly to keep that deal off market or to make sure that it retains under their ownership. And so the bridge loan facility gives them a chance to quickly, we've closed deals in 2 or 3 weeks, very quickly close on real estate, and then have a 6-month period to set up through our platform a long-term financing campaign, because it takes time to tell the story, put content together, market it. I mean, the deals are now selling out in hours, so that's even surprising to us. But even some of the bigger ones will still take a few weeks, theoretically. So that 60, 90, 120-day period to really get the businesses organized, promote the offering, close the offering, distribute the funds, the bridge loan gives them the time to basically get a hold of the asset at the same time. So it shows the kind of the short-term funding without a takeout would obviously be a challenge, but the takeout is through our own platform. So the kind of quick real estate purchase is the highest request for it. The other is a lot of these grant programs, the USDA grants that farmers can access, they require the farmer to put the money up front to then get reimbursed. The farmers don't have capital like that. They can't just put $150,000 into expenses to then get them back 6 months later. So we're bridge lending, basically advancing funds that are used under these programs, like the value-added producer grant covers labor for developing value-added products, and then they submit the grant reimbursement and they get the funds back. So you're really just bridging a timing of cash flow. They don't have balance sheet, they don't have working capital to be able to do things like that. And then the third is operational seasonal capital. There's always a cash flow difference between kind of early season to sale at harvest. That becomes a struggle where they can't then hire the labor they need to harvest it properly. And they're just always losing revenue because they're not properly capitalized. And if they can have that seasonal funding. So, mainly these loans are secured loans backed by real estate or backed by, a committed grant or with clear seasonality to repay it. And then we're translating that yield of 6 to 8% is what we lend to farms through that facility direct to funders who are earning a 5% return. So it's one of these things where it solves so many issues, so many challenges the farmers have with quick financing. There's no such thing as quick financing, regenerative agriculture, it's just non-existent. But we're kind of bringing some of the pace of real estate to that market of, if you can close in 30 days, it's astronomical. You can get a better price on the land. You have just enormous opportunity. And then at the same time, giving funders a chance to put money direct through us into this portfolio of deals, earn a high yield, have relative flexibility because there's a sense of upcoming repayment. So I think it's going to be our trademark product, our anchor vehicle. It's always open. There's always we'll adjust the interest rate based on demand, but it's always going to be flowing capital between. And then the individual deals come and go. It's like merchandising. You prep those, you sell them, they sell out. Now they've got 5-10-year financing locked in with the asset. And the combination of the two of those is really powerful. So it was really built after we kind of understood the market of, well, we have this term financing product, but what's the other need that farmers have? And it's quick, short-term capital, which is non-existent in the market.
Yeah, what really resonates here is I had a guest on. We actually never ended up publishing this podcast, and for this reason, he was trying to pioneer regenerative finance and said that people on the capital side that are funding these things need to expect a negative yield. I'm like, well, okay, that's kind of a hard plea of kick money in and don't get it back to the same amount that you put in. So it's interesting to see just the permutations of how you've gone about it and you're making it work. What do you see the future of the platform, and how do you actually scale this thing? I can see a lot of different ways. Like we've seen the Savory network go with hubs, or are you looking to go international with this outside of the US? What's
Sure. Yeah, so it's obviously a lot of handwork to build the platform and kind of learn the market initially. Most of these initial farmers we funded, I know very well. I visit him tons of times, like we talk all the time. So, that as you grow needs to get broadened, but it's really this many-to-many network of distributive networks of farmers with distributed networks of funders, all organized through our technology platform. So the technology is the enabler of the flow of funds that, you couldn't have 180 people in a deal, offline. It's just not realistic to do it. So the technology enables it to happen, but really it's about a real world interaction and kind of a connection among the people that support it. And then the third piece of that market, you kind of have the borrowers and the farmers, and then you have the capital providers who are putting the money in and receiving it back. The third piece I then see is the service providers, which similarly is a distributed network of people all around the country and world who have expertise that can help farmers, whether that's technical assistance, whether that's marketing support or bookkeeping. And so you're really building a network platform with all three of those integrating. And we're building the systems to allow those interactions to work like kind of on guardrails of, okay, let's streamline our diligence system, and then let's kind of broaden that out. Let's streamline our servicing system and broaden that out. Let's figure out ways to engage more people. So I think the fact that we're remote is key to our viability and growth. That allows us to stay relatively lean and also be in many markets in the country and be actually connected to the networks of farmers we're supporting and actually have a sense of the market out there. And it lets us grow very quickly. That, we just brought on a new team member for product design because that's what we needed, and we can hire literally anyone in the world because of where they're based and bring them on quickly. So I think a lot of what's needed for our business, you're in a sector, as much as there's economic viability, that's always going to be relatively low margin, and so you need to be able to do these deals at a relatively low cost with a pretty efficient system with relatively low overhead. But once those systems are in place and as they're growing, the kind of scale can utilize that same system. So the system we have now could probably do 3 times as many deals next year, and you just keep up that growth. We see enormous demand in the US. Like the US is going to be the leading market for regenerative agriculture, no question. It's not, part of it's that we went so far the wrong direction that there's a wide open opportunity backwards. It's kind of the boomerang. It's also just entrepreneurial mentality of farmers in the US too around navigating these markets. But we've had a lot of interest from farmers in Canada. We've had interest from farmers really all over the world. So the operational, it's really an operational challenge with this business of how do you kind of manage those broad networks of users and customers on each side of the market. But the demand is immense. The demand on the farming side is growing enormously, and the demand on the capital side of funding this type of agriculture is growing enormously, and the demand for people who would like to work on things that are more meaningful at reasonable costs for projects they care about is growing. And so we're really at the intersection of all of those elements. But I'm not, we have not raised traditional venture capital. I'm self-funded, except for a recent round of family offices that are kind of mission aligned who've invested. So it's about long-term for sure. There obviously is a climate crisis and things need to be done quickly, but it took 100 years to build the agriculture system we have now, and alternative systems not going to be 5 years. It's going to take decades. And so building that kind of resilience and pace into the business, I view as like, that's the realistic solution, that it's going to be 20 to 50 years of just slow progress to really build an alternative system that can feed people and take care of the earth and also develop, alternative products through other markets. So I see it coming together. It's just a matter of time, and also, the management system to actually organize these types of networks.
Sounds like you've got your work cut out for you, but it's got to be tremendously exciting.
A few things to do, but I just love it. So it's easy for me to work on.
This is going to be a curveball, and we don't have to touch too much on this, but do you see that there's any parallels with the rise of regenerative ag in Europe? Because I know that you're calling in from London right now.
Yeah, I've been in London the past few years. I basically do farm visits every quarter and visit different part of the country and a bunch of different farms. So I actually find by being here, out of our 14 staff, we are 12 in the US, 1 in UK, which is me, and 1 in New Zealand. So we've got a broad geographic zone. But I find by being here, I am seeing a lot more international activity. I'm interacting with a lot of Australians, and there's certainly opportunity there. The UK itself has recently left the EU. They're rethinking their agricultural policy in a big way. And certainly among Europe, there's a deeper history and culture around food. So that translates into an understanding of this type of product. Sub-Saharan Africa, there's been a lot of outreach because, it's still an agricultural society and there's farmers need basic equipment and infrastructure to grow. So I love the context we're in, that we're seeing the kind of movement. It's a global movement for sure. It's maybe led in certain places more than others. We had a project from Bhutan recently that reached out to us, which is just amazing. I mean, the Himalaya is, that you have a regenerative farm, but that's how people are thinking. And obviously with technology, people are able to hear more perspectives more easily. But the reality is each market is its own regulatory framework. And so as much as there's no borders in the ideas, there are borders in the operational realities. But the thing I will say is that the interest is there around the world, the desires there around the world, and people are drafting off of each other as they earn. So definitely we'll be excited to work in other countries, and we do plan to, but we're still early days in the US, and ultimately, that will be our primary market.
And hopefully others will take suit and follow in your footsteps in their own locations.
And that's the goal, to be the platform that enables it and to allow more of it. But if we end up creating more organizations that are then more effective in supporting regenerative agriculture, all the better. And the desire is there, the interest is there. It's still a tiny speck of the agriculture market, but it's certainly where the opportunity is, and I think where the long-term viability is.
Well, Dan, how incredible, because one of the themes on this show that has shown up in patterns with everybody that is being a change agent within their own slice of the industry is that they're really combining their experience with their passions and what the world needs, and kind of creating something unique. And I'm not sure if you've ever thought of like if this would even be possible if you didn't have the Fundrise experience before that, or if your family hadn't gotten into agriculture or real estate. But however it's come together, I think it's truly phenomenal to watch this burgeon. Where can we send people if they're interested, either being in a capital contributor or in a farmer that's looking for access to capital?
Sure, they can go to our website, gosteward.com, GOSTEWARD.com. They can also email me, dan@gosteward.com. I mean, we want to just engage with people who care about this type of work and find the right opportunity for them to be involved. The goal is to make it easy, but the goal is also to find the right fit for people. So, we're hiring people, we're talking with funders every day, we're talking with farmers every day. We're getting more and more referrals, from other farmers and other networks of people, which I think it's a word of mouth business, which is what I love. That it's like people care enough about the product and the idea that they would like to tell other people about it. And I think from the kind of beginning of what I learned at Fundrise and how do you thrive in a kind of a market of digital fundraising is the story, and the emotional hook matters, and that catches people's attention, and that's what can push it into the market, where you're not having to force it. It's just something that aligns with what people are. And, from the beginning, that's what we did, of how do we create a product that is actually of interest to people, that people will be thrilled to do, and then spent enormous effort to create that and do that from scratch. But I certainly don't think I could have ever done Steward without my background in real estate and Fundrise technology and growing up in real estate and being around agriculture. So people ask kind of how did I end up here? I'm like, well, it's actually the exact skill set of things that I have learned applied in a certain way. And I don't really worry about competition, because it's like just even the idea of doing this is immensely challenging. And I've spent the better part of 10 or 15 years, really my whole life, learning these types of things. But I do find, the integration of passion, experience, skill set, knowledge is really where the creativity comes from. And I think similar with the rest of our team, it's that they have a certain skill set, but they then have the desire to expand the market of regenerative agriculture and support these farmers. And then that leads them to do great work because you want to do it. And so I think if you can just align interest and passion, motivation around where you're putting your money, where you're working, all of that, it it makes a difference.
Dan, thank you for the work that you do. This is just deeply inspiring. I know that people are going to be tuning in and looking to Steward on the platform. We have such complementary audiences and community. I think they're one and the same, actually, because I'll go into speaking at conferences or webinars, and people will ask about regenerative financing, and Steward will come up, and you'll always get a couple of comments of like, I've lent on Steward, and that's why it's so fun just to have that connection and get to know more about you guys. And yeah, what an honor to have you on, and thank you for this opportunity to share your message with our community.
I appreciate it. Really nice to chat.
Okay, everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to another great episode. If you're not already a subscriber, please do so wherever you get your podcast. You can create good karma by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or sharing this show with your friends. If you're looking for ways to get more involved in the regenerative real estate movement, then you are in luck. We have a Facebook community conveniently called Regenerative Real Estate that you can join and be a co-creator with us on this journey. If you have a business or organization that you feel is aligned with our mission to use real estate as the catalyst for a regenerative future and would like to work together, then please be sure to get in touch. We are building an ecosystem to help amplify your work and message, where you can present to our community or sponsor the work that we are doing. You can do this by reaching out to us at team@chooselatitude.com. Last, and certainly not least, this podcast is enabled by the people that buy and sell real estate with us through our network of Latitude regenerative change agents located across North America. Our goal is to help transform homes and habitats, person by person, property by property. And we do that by combining the skills of a real estate professional with sustainable and regenerative consultation. It is time that we all start to live our values, and we hope to work with you on your next real estate sale or purchase. Okay, that is all for now. In the words of Paul Hawkins, remember that we are either stealing our future or healing our future. We are hard at work trying to do the latter. So until next time, be well.